Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dreampath podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. We're here today talking about episode 18 with Dan Friday.
Great episode.
Yeah, I was really happy with the way that turned out.
Oh, yeah.
What are your thoughts on how that episode went and what you learned?
I learned a great deal. I appreciate Dan's connection to his culture and expressing it the way he does with glass and that type of medium that is so old in terms of in part of our history, the glass blowing and part of his Native American culture.
Yeah.
And just showing the connection to that. And I was really impressed with, if you go see the pictures on the website, the work that he's done is amazing.
Yeah, when I saw his work at Stonington Gallery in Seattle, I walked in and I'm looking at these pieces that are extremely fragile and one of a kind. I mean, literally one of a kind, because it takes, sometimes an entire day with a crew of people making these things as a team. And they come out and there's nothing else like it in the world.
Right. Similar
to a painting, but also, with a painting, you can make prints of that painting.
Yeah.
You can't do anything like that with glass.
Not at all.
And especially the way they make it and forge it. And it's just really, really neat to learn how they do it, because until I booked this interview with Dan, I had no idea how they make glass. I knew what, the concept of glass blowing, and I think I've seen pictures or little snippets of video of people glass blowing, but until I watched the entire 3 or 4 hour YouTube video of him in action with his team at the Corning plant making that totem, I just had no idea how much work went into it and what a barrier it was to get into that type of art.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it was very impressive.
Yeah, Dan, another thing about the interview that struck me was even though he's like this preeminent artist, highly respected, work in museums and galleries, and he's traveling all over the world, and he's going, I think just last weekend he was in Chicago, and then he's going to New Zealand to, work, weave with indigenous folks in New Zealand. He is the most humble, normal dude.
Very down to earth guy.
Very, very down to earth. Your idea of an artist is someone who's extremely eccentric and not very relatable. I mean, that's just my preconception or my prejudice with artists and creatives, but just such a nice guy, and really still excited after all these years. I think he's been in it over 20 years, 24 years, something like that, but really excited about the art and the craft of glass making, and not just glass, but all types of mediums. He's not limiting himself at all, but he knows what his strengths are, and he goes in that direction, obviously.
True.
Yeah.
Another thing I liked about him, when you mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan, he knew exactly who that was. He knew who Jimi Hendrix was. And now that, to me, I mean, of course, people are going to know about him, but you can tell he's into him.
Right. Yeah. He has a good sense of music history, and he appreciates, he saw the parallels immediately between glass blowing and being in a band.
That's exactly it. That's right away. I was like, oh yeah, great comparison.
And I think to hear about those parallels from the artist, it helps people who are in other mediums understand that they are more alike than they're not with other artists.
Yeah.
That creatives are part of the same community. Whether you're blowing glass or painting or making music, there's a certain commonality that you share. There are common denominators. And so he brought that out in that interview, and that was pretty cool.
Well, it is like working like a team. If you're in a band, if you've got the right group of guys together, you can make a lot happen, make a lot of great music together.
Yeah.
And I think his team, the way he described it as a band, he's got some really great, dedicated guys working with him.
Another remarkable thing about Dan Friday is he works with, still to this day, Dale Chihuly, who is, if he's not the Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan of glass, I don't know who is.
Right.
But it's just an iconic figure in the art world, and not just the glass world, but the art world, especially Pacific Northwest folks. Everybody knows who Dale Chihuly is. But to Dan, Dale is just another creative in his community of artistic people. And he learned from him, obviously, but he really developed his own style and his own aesthetic that was completely informed by his tribal culture.
Yeah.
Or maybe not completely, but, significantly informed by his tribal culture. And you see that in his work.
Yeah.
So who do we have coming up next?
A guy by the name of Dylan Neuwirth. He's a neon artist up in Seattle.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing that episode. I have not heard it yet. I recorded it several weeks ago, and I remember being in his shop and talking to him in a conference room. But one thing I remember about the whole environment, the milieu, is that it was very loud. There was a lot going on in that shop. And so listeners, just a heads up, there's probably going to be some background noise that is coming from the shop, from the folks that work in that neon shop. But I think it'll be pretty cool to hear because, you get a sense of what is happening behind the scenes when we talk to Dylan and get to know him in that interview.
Well, it's just part of the atmosphere of being in that shop.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to hearing that episode. Jason, thanks for joining me on this recap, and we'll look forward to hearing Dylan next week.
As always, it's a pleasure.
All right, thanks. Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Dreampath podcast. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to your favorite podcast service and give me a rating and review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. I appreciate your time, and as always, go find your dream path.